that I'm really pleased and grateful to speak in front of such an honorable audience, and I would also like to welcome my colleagues from the Consular Corps. Today's issue, transatlantic relations and outdated friendship. I want to cover my speech into two aspects. The first one is transatlantic relationships as such, and I will refer, when I speak of this term, of the relationship between the European Union and the United States on the one hand. Since my arrival here in Chicago at the beginning of this year, I was touched, and let me say it very, very openly, by the lack of interest between these two partners. I realized that there is a lack of interest among American citizens, and also a lack of knowledge as regards the functioning of the European Union, which has naturally also consequences of the policy of the government, of the administration, not only for the current one, but also for previous ones. There is another orientation. The focus is elsewhere. I don't have to tell you that the country is heavily engaged in the peace process in the Middle East, is dealing with its relations with Asia, the emerging countries, China and India. But I think it would not be justified and fair only to blame one side for this current situation, for, let's say, for this dormant relationship. I think from the European Union side we also have some difficulties to bring our act together. And there is still a weakness in our foreign policy. We are still not able to formulate a unified position when it comes to several hot issues in foreign policy terms. And I think we still cannot entirely fulfill the request of Foreign Minister Henry Kissinger 30 years ago, when he asked for a single number to call Europe. A new post for an EU foreign minister and the EU president, we will come this step a little bit closer. So this is the bilateral aspect between EU and between Europe and the US. But I think in order to better understand and in order to better evaluate these relations, we cannot limit ourselves to this bilateral level. We have to see the global aspect and the new security structure. And there it goes without saying that with the fall of the Iron Curtain, with the end of the Cold War, a new structure has been created. This was a fundamental turning point, and with the fading of this bipolar world, we are now confronted with a new situation, and we have to define our relations newly. We all have still in front of us the horrible pictures of the attack in New York in 2001, and we should not forget that at that time, immediately after these attacks, there was full solidarity among NATO member states. And at this time, for the first time in the history of NATO, the so-called Article 5 has been invoked by the member states of NATO. This is a sort of standby clause, which stipulates that an attack on one member state of NATO is considered as an attack on all its member states. So this is also from an historical point of view a very important moment for the history of NATO. Solidarity continued, by the way, also during the Afghanistan war in 2001. NATO members and transatlantic partners adopted a Security Council resolution on the war of Afghanistan. But it is also true that we were confronted 2 years later during the Iraq war with a split within the transatlantic relations and within NATO. And this was not only detrimental to the transatlantic relationship itself, but also to the creation of an EU foreign and defense policy. because President Bush created a so-called coalition of the willing. So either you were on the side of the United States when it came to the Iraq war or not. And Europe was divided in the so-called new or old member states, and this led to fissures, as the French said, and we all know that the Security Council resolution could not be adopted at that time because the bigger member states of the European Union, France and Germany, most and for all, were openly opposed to this war. And this has led in the past to a sort of between the two partners, and I would say as an outside observer, the confidence has still not been entirely re-established. I think we have to work on that. The administration of Obama and the European Union is working hard on that to overcome these fissures. But in order to fully re-establish the confidence, I think we have to ask ourselves how we should proceed. And I think that we should base our policy on issues where we have a mutual interest, where we have more or less an area which is free of disputes. And I think we should start first and foremost in the economic area, when it comes to trade exchange, for example. I have some impressive figures which I have looked up before this speech, and sometimes critics say that there are also disputes, for example, when it comes to legal proceedings in front of the World Trade Organization. But I looked it up, and all in all, this makes only 2% of our overall exchange. And when I take other figures from the WTO, from the World Trade Organization, EU and US relations account together for about half the entire world economy, and they generate the majority of gross world production as well as of the world trade by 40%, 28% of global trade goods, and 41% of services. Another figure, the biggest bilateral trading and investment relationship, transatlantic flows of trade and investments of the country also as an identifying element. The Parliament adopted the constitutional law on the permanent neutrality. And with this fourth important trading union structure and idea, and we hope that this cooperation will but there are also more famous when it comes to the millennium. It takes this friendship for between 6 member states of Europe. Which one is missing? The Union and to the member states, without speaking of transnational
will be served in a couple